Have you ever sat in a room and realized your family had already decided your worth before you even opened your mouth? Have you ever watched the people who raised you give away something that was meant for you and call it love? What happened to me that rainy afternoon in Charlotte started with one signature, one lie dressed up as sacrifice, and one mistake my family never saw coming. My name is Olivia Bennett. I am 34 years old, a senior financial advisor, and for the last 12 years, I have built a career strong enough to manage more than $230 million in client assets. To the outside world, I am disciplined, trusted, and impossible to shake. To my family, I have always been something much smaller, the reliable daughter, the quiet one, the one who was doing fine, so no one ever had to worry about me. Attorney Wallace's office smelled like old paper, polished wood, and rain carried in on expensive coats. The leather chair beneath me gave a soft creak every time I shifted. A lamp in the corner cast a weak amber light across the conference table, and the only sharp sound in the room was the scratch of my mother's pen as she signed away my inheritance. $575,000. Money my grandmother Evelyn had set aside specifically for me, gone in less than 10 seconds. Madeline needs it more, my mother, Carol, said, sliding the papers toward my father without even looking at me. She has 3 children. You're already successful, Olivia. My father, Richard, signed next, calm as ever. You understand, family helps family. Across from me, my younger sister Madeline dabbed carefully at the corners of her eyes with a tissue, performing sadness like she had rehearsed it. I swear this is just for the kids, she whispered. Then her phone lit up on the table, and in the reflection off the glass, I caught 2 messages before she flipped it face down. One was from a contractor confirming a kitchen remodel deposit. The other mentioned a summer travel package in Italy. I said nothing. I just sat there feeling something cold and sharp move slowly down my spine. Then my father gave a little half laugh and added, "Come on, Liv. You're good at making money. You'll earn it back." That was the sentence that hurt the most, because it carried my whole life inside it. Every time I had gone without because someone else needed it more. Every time being strong had made me easier to overlook. I folded my hands in my lap and heard myself say, very softly, "Of course. Family helps family." Then I stood, stepped into the cold white hallway, and listened to my heels click against the stone floor as I pulled out my phone. "Rebecca," I said when she answered, "start the reorganization of the Evelyn Bennett Family Trust. Immediately. Activate Section 7. When I returned, Attorney Wallace had produced champagne. My family was already smiling again. Madeline was talking about tuition, a new kitchen, maybe even taking the kids to Italy. I accepted the glass, but I did not drink. They thought they had just taken $575,000 from me. What they had really done was turn against the one person holding the key to everything. What my family did not understand in that moment was that they had not cornered the helpless daughter they thought they knew. They had just crossed the one person who understood exactly how power moved when money and memory were tied together. I had spent my whole life being the easy one to overlook. My older brother Ethan was the family's bright star, the one everyone bragged about at dinner parties after he became a surgeon. My younger sister Madeline was always wrapped in a soft blanket of excuses, always one bad break away from needing rescue, always one tear away from being forgiven, and me, I was the sensible one. That was the word they used when they wanted to make neglect sound like a compliment. Sensible meant I took out loans for college and worked through school, while everyone applauded Ethan for getting into medical school and handed him the keys to a luxury car. Sensible meant Madeline could burn through money on one failed boutique idea after another and still be called overwhelmed instead of irresponsible. Sensible meant that by the time I was barely old enough to vote, I was already doing tax paperwork for the family at the dining room table, while everyone else laughed in the next room, treating my skill like a household utility instead of a gift. Then, 8 years earlier, everything shifted. That was when my grandmother Evelyn started slipping in and out of clarity, and the family gathered to decide who would manage her affairs, pay the nursing facility, oversee the accounts, and keep the estate organized. No one wanted it. Ethan was too busy. My parents said the systems were too complicated. Madeline made a face and said anything involving statements and numbers made her anxious. Then someone said, "Olivia can do it. She's good with that boring stuff." That was how I became trustee of the Evelyn Bennett Family Trust, not because they trusted me most, but because I was convenient. Still, once I stepped into that role, I saw more than any of them ever had. I visited Grandma Evelyn every week, and unlike the rest of the family, I never arrived with a request hidden inside concern. One afternoon, sunlight was falling in thin stripes across her blanket, and for one sharp, startling moment, her eyes cleared. She gripped my hand with surprising strength and said, "Don't let people who only remember their family when they need money tear apart what I built." Later, when I reviewed the trust documents and opened her safe deposit box, I understood exactly what she meant. The trust was layered, meticulous, almost surgical in its design. As trustee, I had the authority to restructure distributions if family conflict or financial recklessness threatened its purpose. Tucked between legal files were pages in her own handwriting, every loan documented, every promise to repay, every act of manipulation remembered. And inside one sealed envelope with my name on it, she had written, "Because you never asked, I had to leave you power. Otherwise one day they would consume you." What my family believed was a modest $6 million trust had become something far larger under my care. Over 8 careful years of disciplined investment, reinvested dividends, and quiet strategy, I had grown it to $58 million. They never noticed, because they never really looked at me. To them, I was still the daughter who handled dull financial chores. They had no idea that the woman they dismissed was already sitting in control of the one thing that could alter every future in that family. And that was the part none of them had ever imagined, because by the time the sun went down over Charlotte that night, I had already moved from being the family's quiet backup plan to the person who could stop their entire financial world with a single decision. The first call came a little after 9. Ethan. His voice came in smooth at first, casual in that practiced way people use when they are pretending concern before getting to the real reason they called. "Hey, Liv. Mom said things got a little tense earlier. You doing okay?" I stood in my kitchen, still in my work clothes, one hand wrapped around a glass of water I had barely touched. Rain tapped softly against the windows. "I'm fine," I said. There was a pause. Then he shifted. "Good, good. So listen, I checked my account and this month's trust distribution hasn't hit yet. Can you look into that?" I let the silence sit for a second. "It's not delayed," I told him. "It's suspended." His tone changed instantly. "What do you mean suspended?" "I mean exactly that. All trust distributions have been frozen, pending a formal restructuring review." I could almost hear him straighten up on the other end. "Olivia, don't do this. If this is about Madeline getting the inheritance, that's separate." "No," I said, calm and precise. "It actually isn't. Section 7 gives the trustee authority to suspend distributions when family conflict threatens the trust's purpose, or when beneficiaries demonstrate financial irresponsibility. Both conditions have now been met." He exhaled hard, and when he spoke again, the doctor voice came out, clipped and commanding. "You can't punish the whole family because you're upset." "I'm not upset," I said. "I'm acting in my fiduciary capacity." Grandma Evelyn was very clear. He started talking over me, but I ended the call before he could finish. "Then, The family group chat exploded. My mother sent, "You are tearing this family apart." Madeline followed with a voice message full of tears and panic, saying she had children to think about and bills coming due. My father sent only one line, colder than the rest: "Do not test my limits." I looked at the screen until the words blurred, then turned the phone face down and walked to the window. Below me, Charlotte glittered in wet reflections and moving headlights. For years, I had been the one who cleaned up everyone else's messes, translated confusion into numbers, turned chaos into order, swallowed hurt, and called it maturity. That night, for the first time, I let them sit inside the consequences of what they had done. The next morning, they were waiting in the lobby of my office. My building was all glass, steel, soft lighting, and the clean smell of coffee drifting from reception. My employees moved quietly through that space with polished professionalism, while my family stood in the middle of it like a storm that had wandered indoors. My mother's jaw was tight. My father looked insulted by the furniture. Madeline had already been crying. Ethan stood with his arms folded, wearing the expression of a man who still believed authority naturally belonged to him. I led them into the conference room without a word. The moment the door shut, my mother started, "How dare you do this to us?" My father added, "That trust is family money." Madeline pressed a hand to her chest. "Olivia, my kids are going to suffer." I took my seat at the head of the table and slid the folder Rebecca had prepared into the center. "Let's talk about suffering," I said. My voice stayed even, which only seemed to make them angrier. I opened the file and began. "Madeline, over the last 10 years, you have received $946,000 in trust disbursements for emergencies, fresh starts, legal expenses, and elective procedures. None of it has been repaid." Her face lost color. I turned a page. "And the week after requesting funds supposedly for the children, you signed a 3-year lease on a luxury SUV." The room went dead still. Then, I looked at my parents. "You two have taken $1.35 million in advances against future inheritance for failed investments, private club dues, vacations, and expenses far beyond your means." My mother's mouth opened, but no sound came out at first. Finally, she snapped, "You've been spying on us." "No," I said. "I've been doing the job none of you wanted." Ethan leaned forward. "Fine, what do you want?" I met each of their eyes, one by one. 6 months. Madeline gets a real job and starts repaying what she owes. You and Dad attend financial counseling and learn how to live on a budget. And Ethan, you stop treating me like I'm the unpaid accounting department for this family. My father slammed a hand on the table. "This is blackmail." I stood, and the chair rolled back softly behind me. "No," I said, "this is responsibility. You taught me that the strongest person in the room is the one expected to sacrifice. Now, I'm going to teach you something back. Financial power does not belong to the loudest person. It belongs to the one who understands every number on the page." And once those words left my mouth, the 6 months that followed stopped being a family argument and became something much harder for all of them. At first, they fought it the only way they knew how, with pressure and noise. My mother called in tears, saying the stress would destroy her health. My father left cold voicemails, warning me not to shame the family. Ethan contacted a lawyer, convinced there had to be some way around me. Madeline swung between panic and outrage, sending long messages about school fees, groceries, and how her children should not suffer over what she kept calling a misunderstanding. But the answer came back the same every time. The trust was airtight. My authority as trustee was valid. Section 7 was binding. It was not vague, emotional, or open to interpretation. And with every failed attempt to guilt me, scare me, or force me to back down, something inside the family began to crack. Madeline felt it first in a way she could not turn into a performance. Within weeks, she took a job at an insurance customer service center across town. For the first time in years, she had to wake before sunrise, drive through morning traffic, and sit beneath fluorescent lights while strangers complained through her headset for 8 straight hours. One evening, I saw her in the parking lot outside that building. She stood beside her car, staring at a broken nail like it was the final insult, then suddenly laughed at herself through tears. It was the first honest thing I had seen from her in years. At home, the fallout kept spreading. My parents canceled their country club membership. My father sold the luxury sedan he always claimed was necessary. My mother stopped circling beach resorts in glossy brochures and quietly folded them away. One Sunday evening, I stopped by their house to drop off papers and saw my father through the dining room window, sitting alone with a printed budget sheet in front of him, studying it like it was written in another language. Even Ethan, with his surgeon's salary and polished confidence, had to face the truth that he had built a lifestyle around money he assumed would never stop. A month later, he sold the boat he once called his reward for working hard. The real turning point came during the mediation session they had demanded. Their attorney requested full financial disclosure, probably expecting it would corner me into compromise. Instead, the room went still in a way I will never forget. You could hear the low hum of the air vent. My mother's face lost its color first. Madeline gripped a tissue so tightly it tore in her hand. Ethan stared at the report on the table, as if the numbers might rearrange themselves if he kept looking. 58 million? My mother whispered, as though the number itself had offended her. For years, they had believed the trust held around 6 million. They had never asked deeper questions, because the monthly distributions always arrived on time, and that was all they cared about. Now they understood the scale of what they had nearly jeopardized. They had taken $575,000 from me as if it meant nothing, and in doing so, had turned against the person controlling nearly 58 million. That realization changed the room. It changed all of them. Madeline was the first to come to me afterward, not polished, not rehearsed, not wrapped in the tears she always knew how to use. She showed up at my apartment in wrinkled work clothes, shoulders slumped, mascara gone, exhaustion written all over her face. She sat on my couch, stared at her hands and said, almost like she could not believe it herself, "I hate working, I really do. But I'm actually good at it. They made me team lead last week." I studied her for a long moment and heard no performance in her voice. Then she swallowed and said the one thing I never expected from her. "I always thought you were okay because you never complained. I thought if you were strong, then nothing hurt you. I was wrong." The room stayed quiet after that. I did not rush to comfort her, and I did not pretend everything was healed, but for the first time in a very long time, I was no longer looking at a woman performing helplessness. I was looking at my sister. And once I saw my sister without the performance, I knew the final conversation could happen, not to erase the past, but to decide what kind of family, if any, would exist after it. 6 months after that first confrontation, I called them back to Attorney Wallace's office. The same building, the same polished table, the same soft yellow light over the legal folders, but this time, everything felt different. There was no champagne, no easy smiles, no one pretending generosity with something that was never theirs to give. They came in quieter, carrying the weight of 6 months without easy money. Before I sat down, I looked at each of them. Madeline had kept her job and started paying back what she owed. My parents had followed the budget their counselor gave them and, to their credit, stayed with it. Ethan had changed, too, in smaller but real ways. He had started calling me for advice instead of giving orders, and for the first time in my life, I heard respect in his voice. Attorney Wallace folded his hands and waited. I opened the folder in front of me. I'm prepared to reinstate the trust distributions, I said, but not under the old structure. Then, I laid out the new rules. Any future loan would require formal approval and clear repayment terms. A family emergency fund would be created, so no one could use panic as leverage again. And the Evelyn Bennett Foundation would be established to teach financial literacy to young women, because my grandmother had always understood that knowledge is protection. Then, I gave them my final condition. I'm not asking for the $575,000 back. Madeline can keep it, but I want it acknowledged, clearly and permanently, that it was mine to give, not yours to take. My mother lowered her eyes. My father stayed silent. And I want a separate trust for the grandchildren, I added, structured equally. So none of them grows up feeling less chosen because they took a different path. That was when my mother finally broke, not dramatically, not for show. She just looked at me and said, with tears in her eyes, "We used your strength as an excuse to forget you." The room went completely still. In that moment, something shifted inside me. Not forgiveness, not fully, but recognition. For the first time, I was not being seen as the one who cleaned up everyone else's mess or carried the family without complaint. I was being seen as the daughter whose share had been taken because everyone assumed she could survive the loss. After that meeting, things changed slowly, but they changed for real. Madeline and I began building a relationship that felt genuine. My parents became more careful, more humble, less quick to treat my strength like a resource they could use. Ethan later asked me to serve as trustee for his daughter's education fund, and I understood what that meant. It was respect, real respect. On the anniversary of Grandma Evelyn's death, I brought flowers to her grave. The air was cool, the grass still damp, and the wind moved lightly through the trees. I placed the bouquet down and tucked a note beneath the stone. It said, "I kept my promise, and this time, they learned to treat me like family." As I stood up, my phone vibrated. Madeline had texted to say she'd been promoted to manager. My mother had sent a photo from a modest weekend trip with my father. Ethan was asking if I had time to review options for his daughter's college fund. I looked at the screen and smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because it was finally honest. So let me leave you with this. Never underestimate the quiet one in the family, especially when she is the one keeping the books. Some people never need to raise their voice to hold real power. They just wait for the right moment and let the truth speak for them.